we welcome Woody Klemmer. He is a Vanderbilt alumni from 2013, and he's head of growth at Formative. Woody began his entrepreneurial career in the 8th grade when he founded an odd job company, WAK Jobs, that's W-A-K Jobs. Woody grew this business throughout high school and eventually expanded into a full-year multi-state operation while attending Vanderbilt. After college, Woody morphed the business into Gladly Do, an on-demand odd job connecting college students with gig work. Gladly Do was acquired by a Philadelphia private equity group in 2017, and then together they relaunched the business as Labor City. Correct me if I'm wrong, I'm sure you will. A B2B on-demand staffing platform. Currently, Woody is the head of growth at Formative, a behavioral science platform that helps insurance carriers predict user intent by analyzing digital body language while users engage with digital forms and applications. So, welcome, Woody.
Can everybody hear me okay? Awesome. I brought a little cheat sheet. I did a dry run this morning and I went off the rails, so I'm going to try to keep this between the bumpers today. But quick show of hands, just because some of the jokes and the target of this speech was more directed towards students. So just out of curiosity, how many of you are students right now? Oh, wow. Okay. More than I thought. As was mentioned, just to reintroduce myself, I'm Woody Klemmer. I was class of 2013. And it is amazing being back. I just did a little stroll through campus, and it is so fun seeing all of the new buildings, the entrepreneurial center. We did not have that when I was here. Extremely impressed, really proud, honestly, as an alum, to see it. I was an econ major, which was basically the closest thing to a business major or an entrepreneurship major that we had. You know, this was 10 years ago. I'm dating myself. But it was, that was what we were doing at the time. And at the time, honestly, I was not, I would say, mature enough to take full advantage of the entrepreneurial opportunity or educational opportunity that I was presented with here at Vanderbilt. I was candidly somewhat of a shithead in college. I slept through more classes than I attended. I was no stranger to the party scene. I was very active in fraternity life. That was really my main focus: school, business, all of that fun stuff. Sort of took a back seat. Candidly, I was riddled with anxiety for the better part of my 4 years here. I used drugs and alcohol to cope with that, and somehow managed to graduate. I graduated on time, pretty decent GPA. I got a job at a high-flying growth startup in New York City in sales. I lasted all of 6 months before I felt the entrepreneurial pull, and as was mentioned, I took what had been a business that I had been running since I was in 8th grade and turned it into what I kind of deemed a real business. You're gonna see a lot of bunny ears today, so stay with me. But real business meaning this business was now called Gladly Do. It was an on-demand odd job company. I'd been running, as was mentioned, an odd job business for pretty much my entire life at that point. Uber had just come out, so they sort of redefined what on-demand meant, and I took that and ran with it. That was in 2014. We sold that in 2017. Part of the deal was I had to move to Philadelphia to work with the acquiring company. We merged the two together. We became Laborosity, is the correct pronunciation there, but it was a shit name, so I don't blame you. That was a B2B on-demand staffing business. We grew that business to about $5 million in revenue within 18 months. I hired up to, I think it was around 30 people before I jumped to my newest venture, Formotive. That's how you pronounce that one. Another shit name. I got to get better at that. But so moved to Formotive. We hired a management team, or I helped hire a management team. Last I checked, that was doing about $10 million a year. Formotive is now doing multiple millions of dollars. We're up to 30 employees from 4 this time last year. So we're sort of on that trajectory. And the point of my speech today, and I don't know how many of you this is going to register for, but it's called Instagram versus reality. And what that means is basically what we present on Instagram and our social media, sort of to the public, is not always the reality. And everybody, I'm sure, has experiences with this. I am certainly guilty of it myself. Everything I just told you is, about as airbrushed as a Kardashian photo. It is edited, it is doctored, it is intentionally vague, because it sort of leaves you to interpret what you think, right? You start to think, okay, this my Instagram bio could be like 3 times founder and multiple $1 million businesses. And the reality is you hear an acquisition and you're like, man, this guy might be rich. I'm not rich. I can promise you. I was living with my parents a year ago. So I can promise you the things that you see in this keeping up with the Joneses and get rich quick culture that we live in today is just not the reality. Take the acquisition, for instance. Everything, and when I say Kardashian, I know you probably think fake. None of it was a lie, right? It's just a spin job. It's me being a salesperson, getting you to sort of think what I want you to think. The acquisition, I'll just tell you, was 80% equity in the new business. The new business hadn't even started yet, so it was basically worthless. 20% of the cash went towards paying out my investors, who got a nice return, so that was a win. The rest of it, a majority of the rest of it, went towards bailing myself out of $165,000 of personal debt that I had racked up to start the business, because why wouldn't you go and take out a bank loan to start your venture, what should have been a venture-backed business? Lesson learned there. So, the point of all of this is I just think right now as a culture and as a society, we are way too airbrushed. We're way too doctored. And as an entrepreneurial culture, I think we collectively need to just leave that to the celebrities. And we need to be a little bit more pragmatic and a little bit more practical about some of the things that we've gone through. So throughout my talk today, I'm just gonna basically talk from personal experience and some of the headaches, heartaches, speed bumps, walls that I've run into, what I did to, not even really what I did to bounce back from them, just more giving you the other side. Because when, we listen to, right, and I'm sure if anybody in here is an entrepreneur, you've heard of the podcast, How I Built This, right? I bet you everybody nodding heads probably has listened to that. What I want to start one day when I actually set my mind to it and tell myself I'm going to do it is how I really built this. To me, the podcasts, the movies, the books that we read are like the rom-coms of entrepreneurship, right? It's like, there's always like a little drama, but everything always works out in the end, and then they're $1 billion business, and I just had this idea for a suitcase, and I prototyped it, and we raised $15 million, and now we're $1 billion business 3 years later. That is not the reality for 99.99999% of you that are either starting a business or will start a business. And my point is not to discourage you. It's not to encourage you either. And it's not to give advice. There are people way better at that here to give you advice. And it's really more to tell you just about the reality of starting a business. Whether you're in it now or you're gonna be in it, it's hard. Life is hard. You have to embrace the chaos because there are things that you will just never learn in school. And that's no knock on school, education, MBA programs, you name it. It's all good stuff, but there are just lots of things that you have to learn by doing. There's a guy, Gary Vee, I don't know if you follow Gary Vee, and I think he's kind of a goober, and his whole hustle porn, like, 18 hours a day thing is a little tired, but I really like his advice around patience. And what I have learned in the 10 years of being an adult is to extend your timeline, your time horizon, and to realize that you are more likely than not gonna be the Instagram founder who starts a business and 18 months later sells it for $1 billion. More likely than not. And when I say more likely than not, to start a business and make it successful, let alone $1 billion business, is like insanely low. The odds are basically, I don't know what they actually are, but it's like winning the lottery twice. So for me, when I was in college, that was my thought. I had this odd job business that I was making a bunch of cash doing, and instead I was like, fuck that. I'm gonna go off and I'm gonna be a billionaire, and Mark Zuckerberg's a billionaire, so I can do it. Why not? And that was my mentality. That was kind of how I processed all this stuff. But the reality is between now and then, or then and now, I have fucked up way more than I've succeeded. I have made terrible decisions. I've made horrible, horrible hires. I have made taken lots of advice and ignored it because, at the time, you think you're invincible. And you need that stubbornness and that overconfidence. I think every entrepreneur to some degree has like a little bit of delusion, which is necessary, right? We're all crazy. And the way that, I looked at that was at the time when I was in school, Uber, Airbnb, Instagram, Snapchat. It was like, all you gotta do is drop out of college, build an app. Everybody will give you money. Why not? Your idea is a can't miss. If I just capture 1% of this market, we're going to all be billionaires and our investors are going to make a ton of money. It's just this mentality of you see these wins, the LeBron Jameses of the world, and you're like, oh, I can do that. More likely than not, that's not the case. And there is a much longer timeline that you need to learn and you need to fail and you need to get over that and compound those failures so that you can actually be in a place where you're ready, when the time comes. I use the analogy a lot of like running a marathon, right? If you're like, I'm going to go run a marathon, you don't just slap on your running shoes and go run 26.2 miles. You just don't do that. If you're like me with just shit knees, it's like half a mile, and then you get a mile, and then 2 miles, and then 4 miles, and then 8 miles. And then before you know it, you can finally do that. But you have to train your mind and your body in order to be able to do that. And you take the most successful people in the world, the Elon Musks and the Bezos and all those guys, gals, whoever, they either failed multiple times, they succeeded and used that to grow their next business, or they built the plane as they flew, and they figured it out along the way. And I think when you're doing that as an entrepreneur, you got to take the delusion, but you got to just wrinkle it in with a little bit of practicality. And so my whole thesis is just sprinkling a little pragmatism, into the entrepreneurial atmosphere, because I think when you can meet the delusional optimism and aspirational goals with the pragmatic approach of I am actually going to do the following 6 things to accomplish what I'm trying to do, your odds of being successful are astronomically higher. Ambition was never my problem, right? Like I just told you, I always wanted to start a $1 billion business. I still do. Who knows how long it'll take or if it'll ever happen. Maybe it won't, maybe it will, who knows? But like I actually remember one of the classes I actually went to was a marketing class, and the teacher, I forget what we were doing, but she said, everybody write down what you want to earn 10 years from now. And I wrote down $10 million, because why not? Everybody turns in their paper. She's going through the papers, and she says kind of like sarcastically, like, wow, one of you's ambitious, and I'm sitting there looking around like, who's the psycho? Who's the savage that put 100 million or $1 billion? Did not take long to realize I was the psychopath. That was never my issue. It was never like, oh man, I don't set my sights. I was very overconfident. It's why I made some terrible decisions when I was first starting out my business. And what I realized is you need to learn a lot of these things on the fly. And again, no knock on school, but there are just things that you'll never learn in a case study or a textbook or a YouTube video. When you're looking at, and I talk to a lot of MBAs and a lot of really smart people, and you hear these pitches, and it's like, but my pitch is perfect. My business plan makes sense. That's great. You want to do that. You're really good at hypothesizing and looking at the TAM and figuring out the market, and here's what we can do. But at the end of the day, what you really need to start to figure out and what you need to learn is that, my lacrosse coach used to say this all the time. He'd say, you can memorize every play from every position, but eventually the ball's going to hit the ground. And at that point, you just have to be an athlete. That's entrepreneurship. You can have the best business plan in the world, and then poof, COVID hits you. Right? And it's like, oh my God, who would have thunk about that? But you just got to figure out how to kind of churn through that. Those are things that you're going to have to do on your own. And I at the end of the day, it's like driving, right? You can only read how to drive in a manual or watch videos or play video games, but nothing will prepare you for the first time you're merging onto the highway. And you just fucking white knuckle that bad boy and you press the gas and you get on there. That's entrepreneurship. That's how you start to build your skill set to be in a place where you can actually take that adrenaline, that anxiety, those things that happen to you, and actually use them and start to channel them into a productive way. There's no textbook called How to Hire, Manage, and Fire Your Best Friend. How many of you in this room are starting a business right now or are a part of a startup? Good amount of you. How many of you are doing that with a friend, a family member, a girlfriend, a boyfriend? A couple of you. That can be a challenge, right? It's always good and fun when things are going well. My mom and my uncle did it for 15 years very successfully. I've heard horror stories about when it doesn't go well. Those are things that you cannot figure out. There's no advisor in the world that's going to be able to tell you how to deal with that anxiety. There's no, and honestly, I use a lot of analogies if you can't tell, but I use this one a lot. And entrepreneurs generally are the types of people who, when the waiter comes out and says, don't touch the plate, it's hot, ooh, fuck, that is hot. That's just how we are And you need that. There's a lot of this stuff that you just have to learn on your own, but there's a lot of this stuff too that, or really that's exactly my point, is there's a lot of this stuff that you have to learn on your own. There is no advisor in the world that's gonna tell you, and now I'm kind of getting into all my personal experiences here, but what do you do when you find out your business partner that asked you to start paying him weekly instead of bi-weekly, it's because he's addicted to painkillers and you've been funding his drug habit for the last 3 months. And you find that out the day before your first 3 employees start. There's no textbook in the world that's gonna tell you what to do or how to deal with those emotions and how to figure out or navigate that out. You just gotta figure it out. And I don't have the right answer. There is no, again, I'm not here to give advice. I'm just here to tell you about some wacky things that have happened to me that you really can't predict, that you can't plan for. You cannot plan to have the development company that you hired, so you go and take out a loan from the bank because you're an idiot. You spend $50,000 on a website, and when you actually go to use the website, it doesn't work. And you find out that the development company, oh, by the way, they're a foreign development company, and you didn't really background check them that much. They were scamming you, more or less. And you've sunk $50,000 into this. Then you go off and you meet some people that are local, and they say, yeah, well, we'll do that for you, but it's gonna cost you 5 times as much. So you go back to the bank, and you're like, hey, guess what? I wanna borrow more money. And they say, okay, and you do it. And you rack up $125,000 in personal debt, because why wouldn't you? You've run this business profitably since you were in 8th grade. You know what you're doing. You can just get the website out, and you're gonna change the world. Everything's gonna work out. Young and dumb, that was me. And at the time, it's like these things, if I just do this thing, it's just gonna work out. And it wasn't, it did not work out. So people were telling me, you should take venture money. I'm like, take venture money? Why would I give up any of this company? I can own 100% of this. I can't miss. This idea is a can't miss. Everybody says it's a good idea. It was a good idea. It wasn't a great business, but it was a good idea. And that's another thing. There's a lot of ideas that are good ideas that are not great businesses, but there's no prepping you for when that bank, I think, realizes, like, what the fuck are we doing giving this 25-year-old kid $125,000? He's just taking all the money out. He's never paid any back. And they call you and say, hey, Woody, we need you to start paying that money back, like now. And you're like, what? That wasn't part of the deal. I thought I had, infinity timeline to pay this back, or 4 years or whatever it was. And by then it was gonna be hugely successful. So now you actually do have to go out and raise venture money. Except this time, you have a shit website. You're $125,000, really $165,000, because you, of course, go to Chase and take out 2 business cards and rack those up. $160,000+ in personal debt. Now you're raising money from that position. And you have a gun to your head because you need to pay the money back. So you're like raising money to pay back debts, and you're just in a weird position to try to go out and do that. You start pitching, you're pitching. No. And I don't blame them. No. You get to 19th no. You don't even want to get out of bed, let alone work on your business. You're starting to think, like, is this idea stupid? Like, am I an idiot? Do I even have what it takes? You second guess everything. You're walking into your 20th pitch after 19 consecutive no's, and on the way there, you get a phone call that your now ex-business partner died of an overdose. How do you pull yourself together after that and go in there and, hey, can I get 250 grand? Because I got this odd job company. Those are things that you just cannot prepare for. There's no textbook in the world. And I hope to God none of this ever happens to any of you. The point is that there are just things that you got to be ready for, and you got to be ready to bounce back. And I think resiliency is the #1 trait of any good entrepreneur. I'm not anywhere near calling myself a good entrepreneur, but that is one thing that I've always been able to do, is just like take the punch like Rocky, and get back up and just continue to plot forward. You continue to get no's. You get to 40, and then you're really down, and you're like, okay, this is dumb. Why am I even doing this anymore? But then you get a yes, and then another yes, and then another yes, and all of a sudden you're riding the high, and you're at 45, took you 87 pitches, not that I was counting, and you finally get your goal. You get all that money, and you're now like, oh my God, this is unbelievable. Thank you, friends and family. Holy shit, I have my friends and family's money now. That is weird pressure. You're gonna see these people on Christmas, at parties, your mom's friends, you've got their money. What if you lose it? I don't think any of them are gonna starve, but that is just a whole new level of weird pressure, anxiety that you just can't prepare for. Again, there's no book in the world that's going to tell you that until you start to do it. So, not to mention, there's also the whole notion of you never know what's the right decision at the time. Everything's easy in hindsight. Hindsight's 20/20 for a reason. But when you're sitting there and you're faced with, okay, do I go with the angel investor who I kind of feel like is taking advantage of me, wants 20% of the business, but he's going to bring me to people around Boston, raise the money, and help me out? Or do I sell the business to this guy in Philadelphia who's wildly successful but notoriously ruthless? I don't know, so I took option B. I made a deal with the devil, a salary, benefits. I hadn't had that my entire adult life, and that sounded pretty good. So I did that. I won't tell you about the 18 months because I'm contractually obligated not to. That's part of my non-disclosure agreement. But, that was an interesting experience I'll maybe write a book about one day, and we grew that business pretty quickly. We got it to $5 million in 18 months. I hired a bunch of people. I had people with kids in college. My younger brother, I convinced him to quit his job, move to Philadelphia, live with me, work with me, start building this business. We're going out to raise $25 million. At the time, you're like, holy shit, I'm gonna make it. We're raising money at an insane valuation. We had no business raising at, but this guy, he just kind of could do that. And, all of a sudden you're like, I'm gonna make it. 13 years of just plodding this thing along, it's finally gonna happen. You're on top of the world. You get the banks calling you, are we doing this deal or what? You go in to make it happen, and the guy says, I don't wanna do it anymore. You're like, what? He says, yeah, I wanna cut costs. I wanna make this profitable. Let's make this a lifestyle business. The same guy who, when you pitched him for 500 grand, said, this is a rounding error for me. I only swing $1 billion bat. When you wanna step your game up, come back and talk to me. Same guy now wants you to cut costs, fire half your employees. Again, people with kids in college. They left good opportunities. They moved across the country. They're your family, and you got to fire them. So you call his bluff, and you say, no, screw that. I'm not doing that. We set out to do this. We're going to do this. Doesn't happen. He calls your bluff. He writes your salary. He pays you. So not really a whole lot of leverage that you have at that point. You made the deal. You said, you know what, owning a slice of a watermelon, better than owning my whole grape up in Boston. So you did it. Doesn't work out. You go from a 9-figure valuation, thinking you're on top of the world, to the next day, you're fighting over an offer for $1 for your entire equity stake. You got to get lawyers involved. You're now all of a sudden on top of the world to unemployed, literally, because you quit. You don't even get severance because you're an idiot, and you quit because you're stubborn. And, these are just things that all of a sudden you're like, oh my God, what did I do? You bounce back. You meet these other guys that are starting this new business. You start the business, you're growing the business, and then wham, COVID happens. How do you navigate that? There's just weird situations that you got to be prepared for because life is it is unpredictable, and you have to learn to embrace the chaos. And there's one thing that I give myself credit for. I do not give myself credit for a lot, but the one thing, and it's actually a piece of advice my uncle told me when I first started my company, and he said, if you get up, and this is the one thing I'll leave you guys with, when you get up every day, when you're starting your company, he said, you got to just take one step forward. He said, it might be an inch. Maybe you just end up staying in place. Maybe it's a jump. Maybe it's a leap. You never know, every single day. But if you do that for a year and you don't look back, and then on that 365th day, you turn around, I guarantee you will be a lot farther than you ever thought you would be. And when you do turn around, and you inevitably will, you're going to realize the path was windy, maybe you stumbled here, you fell there. But every day, if you get up and you just kind of keep putting one foot in front of the other, and you just continue to churn, you continue to try to make it happen, you will be able to get a lot farther with your business, in life, in relationships, whatever it is. That's the one thing that I will leave you with. It's the only piece of advice I've got. One foot in front of the other. There's no magic bullet, there's no silver bullet, there's no answer for any of the problems that you're gonna face. You're gonna have to figure it out on your own. There's no playbook when you're starting a business, especially when you're doing something novel. So that's what I'll leave you with. That's all I got for today. One foot in front of the other. Thank you for listening.